we're going to get Brexit done. The electorate were clear. The voters wanted to make sure that we left the European Union. So a little bit later this week, we'll have a Queen's speech. That's when the government unveils its whole programme of laws for a new parliament. And then on Friday, we'll bring back the bill which will make sure that we leave the European Union. And Parliament will ensure that that is done by the 31st of January.
Can we talk about what you mean by being done? Because that EU chief negotiator, you'll be very familiar with this, Michel Barnier, saying the chances of a complete deal by next December is unrealistic. It'll only be the bare bones.
Well, we will formally leave the European Union. We'll be out. There'll be no more members of the European Parliament, European commissioners or anything like that on the 31st of January. That's it. And then we will have conversations with the European Union about our new relationship, which will be based on free trade and friendly cooperation. And the political declaration that the EU have signed up to commits them to finishing those conversations by the end of 2020.
So as you heard there, the Tory government are planning to take us out December 2020, do or die. That's what they say at the moment. Of course, these are politicians, pinch of salt. Brexit bill to rule out extension to the transition period. This is because Boris Johnson plans to enshrine in law that the Brexit deadline cannot be extended again. Of course, because we know what happened for the last 3 years. And this is good news. It now means Boris Johnson has no choice but to either pass a deal and get a future trading arrangement with the EU before 2020, or go for no deal in December next year. Because if he does not, we will have his balls to the fire for going back on his promise of getting Brexit done, as you've just heard Michael Gove say there. The article reads, the government is to add a new clause to the Brexit bill to rule out any extension to the transition period beyond the end of next year. The post-Brexit transition period, due to conclude in December 2020, can currently be extended by mutual agreement for up to 2 years. But an amended withdrawal agreement bill the Commons is set to vote on this week would rule out any extension. Good. That is something that needs to be done, and it needs to be enshrined in law, which, as I've said, is what Boris Johnson is doing. Critics say this raises the chances of leaving the EU without a trade deal, which, of course, it does. It still doesn't make it the most likely option, guys, so don't get all excited about that right now. It just puts it back on the table as a viable option, and it could be used as a club to beat the EU with if they plan, as I released in a video earlier, to play hardball with Boris Johnson. But to be honest, in my opinion, he should use this to just go back to the EU and get a better deal. He now has the power to do that because he can just say, right, we'll leave on no deal if you want to play silly buggers. I guarantee to you, they really won't. It continues, but Senior Cabinet Minister Michael Gove insisted both the UK and the EU had committed themselves to making sure that we have a deal by the end of 2020. Now, if I remember rightly, the political declaration says they will endeavour to do it, not that they will do it. So that's bollocks. He's just talking shit there, I'm sorry. And of course, we can't forget that I'm sure Boris and Gove would prefer a deal to leaving with no deal. But they'll still want it on the table so that we can't have the same situation we had before. Because as we all know, if Boris Johnson extends the deadline, he is fucked. It won't just be Labour he has to worry about then. And I'm sure given the results of the election we've just had, he will know that by now, and so will his team. Dominic Cummings and those around him are definitely not stupid. Shame the same can't be said for Labour though, hey? Well, maybe it's not a shame. He also promised Parliament would be able to scrutinise the withdrawal agreement bill in depth. Yeah, because he essentially controls Parliament now with an 80-seat majority. And like I've said, given what happened in the election, it would be career suicide for any Tory politician to go against that. Labour MPs have just found that out, remember guys, so has the Labour Party and its delusional terrorist-supporting scumbag leader. Shadow Brexit Secretary and ardent Remoaner Sir Keir Starmer said the move was reckless and irresponsible, and he argued that the Prime Minister Boris Johnson was prepared to put people's jobs at risk. No, that's the Labour Party that's prepared to put people's jobs at risk with their mad policies that would crash the economy and create more unemployed, much like what has happened every other time they've been in government. Liberal Democrat interim leader Sir Ed Davey said the only way Johnson can meet the December 2020 timetable is by giving up all previous promises to Leave voters and agreeing to all the demands of the EU. No, he can just go with no deal now. He's about to enshrine it in law, you idiot. Just like Labour, the Lib Dems are delusional. You would think after Swineson got kicked to the curb that they might learn something. But Ed Davey's just as stupid, it would seem. Downing Street has said the government plans to ask the new Parliament to have its first debate and vote on the withdrawal agreement The legislation needed to ratify Brexit on Friday, as we all know. Hopefully I'll be able to cover some or all of that if it's interesting. It might well be boring. You lot can let me know down in the comments if you want me to do it. With a majority of 80 following Thursday's general election, Mr Johnson is expected to get the bill into law with few changes in time for the UK to end its EU membership on January the 31st. The government will then have until the end of the transition period on the 31st of December to negotiate a free trade agreement with Brussels before the trade relationship defaults to the World Trade Organization, or WTO terms, that we have wanted for a while now. Senior EU figures, including the bloc's chief negotiator Michel Barnier, are sceptical that a deal can be agreed within that time. Oh well, we'll see you later. It's you that needs our money at the end of the day, so I'm sure you'll pull your finger out of your ass when you realise Boris ain't gonna fuck around with you. Because if he does fuck around and start giving concessions to you, you better believe us British voters are not gonna stand for it. That's for sure. And we're not gonna read the analysis by these fuckers. Now, they was also discussing this on the Politics live show, so we'll take a quick look at that as well before we end the video.
Well, you mentioned Brexit and the withdrawal bill. Let's have a look at the front pages of two of the newspapers on exactly what he plans to do in terms of amending and changing the withdrawal agreement bill. We have the Daily Telegraph, Boris Johnson to enshrine 2020 Brexit in law. And the Financial Times has this on its front page, which is Johnson vow on Brexit transition raises fears of cliff edge next year. Why is he doing this? Enshrining in law this idea of not extending the transition?
I wonder.
Well, you know, he said he was going to hit a previous deadline and wasn't able to do so because of the mobilisation against him by the Remainers in Parliament. And he's gone to the country saying, in that famous phrase, you could even say notorious, but a phrase that resonated, he's going to get Brexit done, leaves on the 31st of January with a withdrawal agreement, then you enter into the negotiations on the future relationship, and he's trying to say, look, we are going to deliver what we have promised to the people.
Right, it's just symbolic, it's a signal, it's a political move.
Right, so I don't think it's just a kind of domestic policy pledge to try and reassure those Labour leavers that came across to the Tories that they won't dilute Brexit, even though it's perfectly justified for him to do that because they don't want a diluted Brexit. That's why they rejected Labour and the Liberal Democrats in their droves. It's also, I think, sending a signal out to Brussels. There's been a lot of talk among the EU27 about whether this time frame is realistic and whether it can be justified. Brexiteers throughout the entire process of the last 3.5 years have wanted no deal to stay on the table. Lo and behold, when push came to shove in October and he was able to negotiate the unicorn deal that people like Rory Stewart said he would get down his knees and thank God for him producing because it was so impossible, that does focus the minds. It particularly focuses the minds of people like Leah Varadkar over in Ireland, for whom no deal would be catastrophic.
Well, I mean,
yeah, but you're a year away. I mean, Johnson has shown, if he's nothing else, he's a pragmatist. And he's infinitely flexible. So you know, he will deal with the problems as and when they arise.
Right.
I think
this is just a marker for the direction of travel.
It's positive he's showing a commitment to doing what he promised, and we've not turned all these voters in the North Tory overnight. Exactly. We need to keep the promises, and this is just laying out firmly that we're going to do that.
Right, but it has raised, hasn't it, again, as the FT has said, the idea or prospect of a cliff edge.
Yeah, but that was always a prospect because back when we were discussing the actual Brexit deal and whether he would or not get a withdrawal agreement, you then had the likes of Philip Hammond, Dominic Grieve, David Gauke and others warning against a second cliff edge in December 2020. Their intention, and that of many Remainers across the House, was to try and prevent that happening in December 2020. And I suppose this is basically, pardon the pun, but this is Boris Johnson trying to seize the momentum of what's just happened in order to capitalise on it before everyone breaks up for Christmas.
But that's all it is. That's the thing. That is all it is.
And he's got a majority of 80. I think it's
so
trying to send the message back that actually they are serious about delivering on the referendum result after 3.5 years of frustrating prevarication.
But as you say, sending a message is the definition of symbolism. That is exactly what it is.
Well, he's also writing it into the legislation that's going to be discussed on Friday, right? Baubles are being removed from this bill now, so something physically is happening to it.
Also, symbolism matters in
Of course it does.
Now, the guy speaking at the first part of that clip was actually from The New Statesman, a left-wing media outlet that does not support Boris Johnson. But he is right. At the end of the day, what happened before this election has caused Boris to think, you know what, I'm going to try and pay some of the trust back in the people, and I'm going to enshrine into law that we are leaving in December 2020, like he promised. Now, there's still no guarantee that he will do that, but hopefully he will. It's definitely a step in the right direction as far as I'm concerned. And it seems even this guy from the New Statesman can understand that. Before the Telegraph editor rubbishes what Joe Coburn says regarding it just being symbolic. It is a lot more than symbolic, although it is still symbolic in a way. It is a sign of intention, as I've already said, that Boris is actually going to do something. It's moving forward. And it also sends a stark warning to the EU that Boris ain't playing games with these people. We do not have the Remoaner Parliament that we had last year or even earlier this year. So it's a completely different animal now, and Boris can go about this in any way he chooses with the 80-seat majority that he currently has, of course with exceptions. But generally, he has free rein. Parliamentarians, as I've already said, now know that if they go against what the people want, they will lose their job. The anger is there. They don't want to poke it with a stick again, do they? The Telegraph bird is spot on when she says people don't want Brexit diluted at the end of the day. That's why the Lib Dems and Labour was completely rejected at this election. So much so that Jo Swinson lost her seat. Every single traitorous MP that switched parties to the Lib Dems has lost their seat also. And of course, as we all know and have been revelling in for days, the Labour Party got absolutely trounced. As if it was ever a shock to anyone that going against what the people voted for was not going to end well for these people. Anna Soubry, Dominic Grieve, Gork and the rest of them have all found out exactly how that feels. And she rightly points out that for the last 3.5 years, Brexiteers have wanted no deal to stay on the table. Though to be honest, they want it to be the first and foremost choice, unless the EU can come up with something better. Because if we leave on WTO terms, I'll guarantee to you right now, the EU will come running to us, offering us whatever we want, just so they can continue to get our money, access to our fish, along with continuing to sell us plenty of goods without tariffs. Because remember, if we set the tariffs, we can fuck up their exports to us, which will put them right in the shit. And let me tell you, everything they sell, we can buy from China, America, or any other one of the 100 and odd countries there are in the world. The EU does not create anything special at the end of the day, nothing that can't be replicated by someone else in a different country, and I expect China are already replicating it. They copy everything that the West makes, so I'm sure they've got everything the EU makes. So even the trade argument with the EU is kind of mute because we can get it from anywhere else. And with the speed in which global trade happens nowadays, it will not affect anything at all in my opinion. I might be wrong, but I can't see it being wrong. Global trade is a very efficient machine right now. And yes, as Joe Coburn said, it has raised the prospect of their so-called cliff edge, or our celebration day, whichever way you want to look at it. But at the end of the day, as soon as Boris Johnson got a majority, that prospect was already raised, as I've said already. And of course, towards the end of that clip, once again, the Telegraph bird is correct. Boris Johnson is going to seize the momentum and rub it in the face of all the Remoaners, the fact that he is going to bring about the possibility of no deal in 2020, likely because what they all did before the election, as we all know and I covered at the time. I bet hearing this news has made John Berco's face more sour than the exit polls on Thursday night. But as I'm sure I've already said in this video, Boris doing this is a double-edged sword for him. At the end of the day, it brings a lot of people on his side and looks good for us because we might well get a no-deal Brexit, or it might mean a better trade deal and future relationship with the EU, something more along the lines of what we want, rather than them controlling us like the Maybot deal or Boris Johnson's deal still could be. Because like I've said many times, the political declaration is not set in stone. We could still end up with a Maybot, or as we're hearing now, we could end up with a no-deal Brexit or a Canada-style free trade deal. Everything is still on the table. That's the point of this, along with, I think, rubbing it in the Remoaners' faces. Which is great, and I love it. I will have to keep an eye out on Twitter for the absolute shitstorm that's going to follow this. But on that note, I am going to end the video there, guys. I want to thank our PayPal, Patreon, Subscribestar, and YouTube members for supporting the channel, along with everyone who watches my videos. Remember to let me know what you guys think down in the comment section below. Leave a like, subscribe with a notification bell, and share this video as it helps the channel a lot. And I'll see you all in the next one.
There is a pattern consistent throughout history of oppressed people turning on the oppressors, slaves against their owners, the peasantry against the feudal barons, colonies, Mr. Verhofstadt, against their empires, and that is why Britain is leaving. And it doesn't matter which language you use, we are going, and we are glad to be going. We're off.